Of all the counties of Britain, perhaps the most celebrated for its wildlife is Norfolk. From the Wash in the northwest to the Broads, from the North Norfolk coast to the Brecks, everywhere there is rare and special wildlife. And protecting it since 1926 is Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which today is engaged in a national programme called Living Landscapes. Living Landscapes are about restoring habitat where it exists, recreating habitat where it has been lost, and reconnecting areas of isolated habitat. Crucially, it's also about reconnecting people with the landscapes they inhabit. Across this series, we'll be exploring the living landscapes of our county, meeting the people who are helping to restore them, and learning about the rare wildlife which inhabits them. This is Wild Norfolk. Of all the living landscape projects in Norfolk, this is the flagship. It's a place where the land meets the sea, where the history of wildlife conservation in Norfolk meets the present, and where thousands of people meet wildlife, in many cases for the first time in their lives. This is the Cley to Salthouse living landscape. Historically, the Cley to Salthouse living landscape would have been dominated by salt marsh, flooded twice a day by the tide. However, in the 17th century, the entire area was embanked, converting the marshes to freshwater marshes fed by springs in the underlying chalk. Since then, freshwater wildlife has thrived at Cley Marshes, breeding waders and wintering waterfowl, and people have come here to enjoy them. Traditionally, they were wildfowlers, and then collectors of rare birds, and finally, in the 20th century, conservationists. The lifeblood of the Cley to Salthouse living landscape is its fresh water, which rises from springs in the late Cretaceous chalk underlying the whole living landscape. This fresh water feeds the reed beds, which are nesting habitat for rare bearded tits, bitterns and marsh harriers. It feeds the scrapes, where water levels are managed to favour the nesting of little ring plovers and avocets. And it feeds the freshwater grazing marshes, which are crucial nesting habitat for redshanks and lapwings, and winter habitat for grazing pink-footed geese and widgeon. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Cley to Salthouse living landscape is the coming together of so many different habitats. Best known amongst them are the freshwater habitats, and just outside here we can see the scrapes artificially made by humans for the benefit of birds. There are avocets here, black-tailed godwits on their migration, black-headed gulls that have nested on Blakeney Point coming to loaf through the rest of the summer. But there are many other habitats here too. The Shingle Ridge is to the north of us, and inland, perhaps a little bit less known, on the Ice Age ridge known as the Holt to Cromer Ridge, we have Kelling Heath, Salthouse Heath, Holt Lows, important heathland habitat for a whole different set of wildlife. All of them squeezed into this one small landscape on the North Norfolk coast, which is what, together with its people access, with its visitor facilities, makes it such a rare and special place.
The reserve is supported by a whole team of different volunteers. So there are those of us that work out here on the reserve itself. The reception staff provide a really useful service to interact with the public, provide them with information and tell them about how the reserve works. We've got volunteers in the new Simon Aspinall Centre that help interpret what's going on the coastline, and we've got volunteers who do simple practical work on the reserve. The pond dipping platform that's behind me was built by a group of volunteers. So the whole volunteer team here are here to interact with the public, help them get the best out of their visits, give them information which they may not know about how the living landscape here is being developed. This is, after all, one large nature reserve as far as the eye can see. Lots of and many varied different bits of wildlife on it, and we're there to try and help and interpret and share that with the visitors.
Well, the National Trust and Norfolk Wildlife Trust have a great relationship because we're neighbours, and National Trust manages Blakeney Point, which starts at Cley, effectively, or before Cley, so we're both owning a piece of land that connects to each other. Terns and seals are our key wildlife, that's why we're here really. The terns have been nesting here for many, many years, and for many, many years the National Trust has been protecting them from disturbance, protecting them from predators, and monitoring their success and the trends in populations over the time. And then seals are a little bit more recent in their explosion in numbers. So the grey seals have only really appeared in the last few decades, and now the breeding colony is well over 2,000 pups. So a lot of time is spent watching the seals, making sure that they're not disturbed, and also promoting a fantastic wildlife success story.
In a national context, probably the most important habitat here at Cley is the Shingle Ridge. It's most famous for its flora, and the best known of the species that characterises it is this, the yellow-horned poppy, which in the whole of the UK can only be found on shingle ridges in East Anglia. In the history of wildlife conservation in the UK, few dates are more important than March 1926, when a group of friends led by Dr. Sidney Long got together to buy Cley Marshes. Later in the year, they created a trust, Norfolk Naturalists Trust, to manage the site and to continue buying nature reserves across the county. Following this model, a further 46 wildlife trusts have been founded around the country to buy and preserve wildlife sites, to influence the protection of the landscape, and to inspire others to get involved in wildlife, to enjoy it and to live alongside it in our modern countryside. Yet despite all these amazing developments, some things never change. Since 1926, the warden of Cley Marshes has always been a member of the Bishop family. First, great-grandfather Bob, then father Billy, and now his son Bernard. Over 90 years, they've not just taken care of the marsh and its rare wildlife, they've also taken care of millions of visitors to the reserve at ever better visitor reception facilities.
Well, of course, in the early days, there weren't any visitor facilities at all. And my father would meet people down the East Bank car park. He had a little wooden hut there. And 6 or 8 people walking through the marsh, back at lunchtime, and that was it completely. Apart from that, it was a very private place. So we applied for planning permission to the district council, and we built 800 metres of boardwalk out to the central height so less able people could actually get into the middle. We had the money available to build our new centre. It was built, and it was estimated that if we could get between 30 and 35,000 people each year, it was going to be a good investment. And we're now in excess of 100 and 110,000 people. And now, of course, with the Simon Aspinall Centre, it's a big new piece, and the new land that we bought, it's a big, big jigsaw now. It's a big, big area. Sir David Attenborough was here, of course, wonderful man. We walked out onto the new land, and he sort of had time with us to talk about it and how we were developing it, and the enthusiasm that he still has. You know, it's somebody you can listen to all day. Wonderful.
You've already heard why this is a great day. The acquisition of that bit of land, the last bit of jigsaw puzzle that unites this coast and turns it into one of the great places in this country to see wildlife. Every breath of air we take, every mouth of food we eat, comes from the natural world. We are part of the natural world, and we have to understand it because it's in greater danger than it has ever been, and we ourselves have been responsible to some degree for that situation. So this, as I say, is a great day. It's a great day because of that acquisition of land, which is now going to be turned for the benefit of the wild creatures that live on it. It's a great day because of this institution, this building, this centre of knowledge and wisdom that will be coming to everybody, including particularly our young people. It is a great pleasure for me to be here on this great day.
Cley Marshes and its visitor centres are open year-round, and every day of the year there's something fascinating going on with the wildlife of this unique place. As we leave Cley Marshes, we come to the end of our series. We visited the Brecks and the Broads. We visited the heaths and the woods of Norfolk and the North Norfolk coast. But as our series ends, our exploration of wildlife in Norfolk doesn't. For now, the baton passes to you. It's time to get out and explore these wonderful places, learn about the wildlife which inhabits them, and make these living landscapes your own.